Guys, Keith is fine, by the way. He sprained his ankle playing basketball. You picked up his car? Okay. He needed someone to pick up his car. Also, he's sick. But other than that, you guys, he's doing great, and I think we'll see him next week. So, I know, right? He probably will be sitting though, and not jumping. But we are starting a new series this evening about Genesis. And Genesis, do you know what book of the Bible Genesis is? No. It's the first one. It is the first book of the Bible, and really sort of the understanding about this sort of series and idea is that we need to know how the story starts in order to understand the rest of it, right? If you were to pick up a book and you were to open to the middle of it, you probably wouldn't understand what is going on, right? I'm guessing. But if you opened up and you started at the beginning, naturally you would be able to follow along with the story. And I think the same thing can be true when we look at the Bible. That the Bible is a story that is really long and complicated, and that there are pieces of it that we can understand, but I think we get a better idea of the entire book when we can understand the beginning of it. And so what we're going to do over the next few weeks is look at the beginning of this story in order to get a better sense of it. But as I was thinking about the beginning of Genesis, and the very beginning is the creation narrative, I immediately thought of the Lego movie. Has anyone... You guys, thank you. Maya's really excited about the Lego movie. Okay, one of you is into this, and everybody else is just gonna have to go along for the ride. It has been a while since I've seen the Lego movie, so if you're really familiar with the plot and I mess it up, sorry. But, yeah, Maya, you can correct me. But really, I think this is kind of interesting as I was thinking about it, because at the beginning of the Lego movie, we follow Emmett, our main character, that guy. And he's just an average, ordinary dude. And so we see him, like, wake up and get ready for work. And then I think he watches TV at some point. And then we see him sort of step out onto the street. And really, without realizing it, we are being introduced, we're being welcomed into sort of the world of Legos. And we get to see kind of what this world is about, right? We get to see what the buildings look like and whether people are driving in cars or flying throughout the sky. We get to see what type of people are around, what Emmett does for a job. Like, really, throughout this sort of beginning montage, we're like introduced to the world of the Lego movie. And this isn't like just a thing that happens in the Lego movie. My guess is basically any story you see or read or experience, like at the beginning, they're going to introduce you to the world. They're going to tell you what's going on. You're going to get a sense of like what the parameters and the rules and the expectations are of this world. And so we see Emmett, and I don't really remember how, but at some point he gets the cap to the super glue like stuck to his back. I think this is what happens. And then,
Don't spoil it.
Spoilers, if you haven't seen the Lego movie, it's been out for long enough. And so Emmett is like trying to help his friends, and they're trying to figure out what's going on because there's some evil guy and something about Taco Tuesday, Lord Business. And basically what's happening is like people are being frozen. We later figure out they're being glued together, but they don't know what's going on. The Craig, oh, thank you. But essentially, Emmett and his friends are trying to figure out this problem. They're trying to solve it, and they think they have it figured out. They think they know how they can accomplish it, only to realize sort of at the end of their rescue-saving mission that they do not, in fact, know what is going on. And it ends up with Emmett sort of sacrificing himself by going into this black hole, which we later find out is just him falling off a table. But what happens is that Emmett falls down, and what we realize is that these Lego people, in their pursuit of this world and to solve this problem, they have made a mistake. because they have been focusing on the world and what is in front of them, and they haven't stopped to consider if there's maybe something outside of it. If there's maybe something outside of the world that they are living in. And what we realize is that Emmett and his friend's problem is only really solved when they can finally connect with the creators of the world. You see where I'm going? But what happens is that when Emmett kind of escapes out of this world, he realizes that there is this father and this son, and they are the creators of the world, and they have much more power to control the world than Emmett does, and they are actually the ones that put it back together. And I think what we realize when watching that movie is that we can actually better understand the world when we understand who created it. And I think that's exactly what the book of Genesis is trying to do, and the reason why it starts with a creation story. Because we can better understand the world when we understand who created it. Because when we understand who created the world, we can understand the purpose and the intentions for this world. What happens in that Lego story is that they try to solve a problem that is not actually the problem they're thinking they're trying to solve. Why? Because they don't know the creators of the world. That if we're looking for purpose, if we're looking to understand what this world is about and who we are and who God is, that we need to understand the creator of the story. See, a lot of times when people, and we've talked about this before this year, so I don't mean to keep going back to this, but when people look at this creation story, the way it's been presented by some people as if this is like a scientific telling of how the world is created, and that's not what the biblical authors intended. First of all, they wrote it thousands of years ago, so you better believe they did not have a 21st century understanding of science. It's pretty obvious, right? And yes, we believe that this Bible is inspired by God and that God is directing what is being written, but to look at this book and to say that its intention, the intention of this creation story is to tell us step by step how it was created is actually not understanding the story. We see and we get this creation story to tell us the purpose of the world, not how the world was created. You see, I could look at this podium and I could tell you step by step how this was created, how we got this metal. I didn't make this, but you could imagine that I know who did. Got the metal and how we welded all of the pieces together and measured this wooden top and secured it. I could describe to you step by step how this podium was created. I could scientifically tell you after studying it myself. And then, when it was done, you would know how this was created, but you might not know what it's for. You would know how I built it, but if you'd never seen this table before, you might not know what the purpose is. Do you eat off of it? Is it an obstacle to jump over? And you would have no idea unless I told you that its purpose is actually to hold sermon notes for sermons. I wish I could jump. Can anyone jump over this? We're not going to try. But you might know exactly how this was created, but unless I describe to you the purpose of it, you would actually not know what it's for. Are you tracking with me? Can you understand maybe how we've confused the intention of the creation story? That we've made it so much about how, step by step, when we're missing out the why. Why are we here? What is this world about? And who is God? And so just with the couple minutes we have left, what I want to do is give some of that information to you. And in this creation story, it's actually written as a poem, and it's very long, so I'm not going to read it. But basically what we see is God creating the world. And the way that it's written is that God speaks the world into existence, and it follows this pattern. That God says, let there be, and then creation springs up from it. And then when something is created, God says, and it was good. And so in the first 3 days, the biblical authors describe this amount of time as days. Once again, remember, we're reading poetry, so that doesn't mean necessarily literal days. On the first 3 days, they describe the earth as being chaotic. Like a wasteland is kind of how the world is described at the beginning. And what God does is he steps into, they describe it as like chaotic waters, and God creates order out of it. And that's the first thing we learn about God, that God creates order out of chaos. And so for the first 3 days, he orders the world. He creates light. He creates land, and he splits the water and the sky and the land, and he creates morning and he creates night. And you can start to see how this might play out if we understand that our God is a God who makes order out of chaos. And we see that in the world, right? No matter how chaotic and how much of a mess today is, tomorrow's coming. The sun will set, and then the sun will rise, and you will have another day. There will be order, something that keeps it going. And I bet we can even see that with ourselves too, if we dare to go one step further and say, well, if God is a God who creates order out of chaos, maybe God takes me, a person who sometimes feels purposeless, sometimes messy, sometimes chaotic, and I bet if he gives purpose to the world he created, I bet he gives purpose to me as well. So he creates order the first 3 days, and then the second 3 days he fills the earth with animals that fly and animals that swim and animals that walk in the land and plants for vegetation. And then at the end, he creates humanity. And everything that God creates, God says it is good. But at the very end, God creates humanity, and he has something different to say. He says that humanity is very good. Very good. Why? Because humanity is different. We are created not like all other creation. We are created to be image bearers of God, and next week Sam's going to talk about that and what that looks like. But what we see is that from this creation story, if human beings are the end of it, if they are the sort of crowning jewel of creation, what that actually tells us is that God has created the world for humanity. That this world was specifically created for humanity to flourish, for humanity to thrive. That this world was created specifically for us to inhabit it. In fact, we see this because after humanity's created, God says, okay, I give you responsibility for the world. The word he uses is steward. Everyone say steward. Sounds like Stuart, but it's with a D instead of a T. And basically what that means for is you have rule and reign over the world. You have responsibility over it. Responsibility to care for it and to keep it. You see, there seems to be this mindset among some Christians that I think is pretty ill-informed, if I can say so myself. And it's basically this sort of mindset, that like the earth doesn't really matter, we're going to heaven anyways, which we can describe that, but like that's not really new heaven, new earth. Anyway, it's not the point of this message. But that like the earth is just, if it's for us, and if it was made for us, like we can just do whatever we want. Doesn't matter. Everything on the earth is for us to use. Who cares what happens to it, right? But if we look at this idea, if God says, no, I want you to be like me on the earth, what do we see God do? Create and care and keep and love the things that he creates. And he says, I didn't ask you just to rule this and use it however you want. I asked you to steward it. If someone gave you an egg and said, steward this egg, and you just dropped it on the floor and let it shatter, you're probably not doing what was intended of you. Or if you get really hungry, and you decide just to eat it, you're probably not doing what was intended of it. No, if you're, sorry, I don't know. If you're asked to steward this, right, you're going to care for it. You're going to spend your time making sure it doesn't fall, it doesn't crack, it doesn't drop. In the same way, like as Christians, I really believe that our call is to make sure that waters stay clear and the earth stays healthy, that trees can grow, that the sky is free. Like, we're called to care for this world, and God says, I give you real responsibility over it, which means like we have real decision-making power over the world. That's a big responsibility, but it's one that we're entrusted with. And then lastly, if God created this world for us, we must ask the question, then what is our purpose in the world? If God created the world for us, then what is our purpose in the world? And this is a question a lot of us have, and we don't normally connect it with the creation story. We ask, like, what's my purpose? Like, what does God put me here to do? What am I supposed to do with my life? Like, we ask all of these questions. And I think it's interesting if we were to go back to the very beginning and we were to see what intention we were created with, and if we are created to be like the God who created us, what is our purpose on the earth? And so as we close, I just have 3 things I want you to know about. First, we are created to enjoy the beauty of the world. To enjoy the beauty of the world. There seems to be sometimes this mentality or this stereotype among Christians that like we're supposed to like not do any of the like fun stuff. And I suppose it depends on what your definition of fun is, honestly. But that we're supposed to like somehow keep away from all of the good things of the world. But God actually created the world and he called it good, and then he said, it's for you. I want you to experience the goodness of the world. And so that means like things like nature, like forests and rivers and mountains and beaches, that we're called to enjoy them. To understand that they were created for us, yes, to take care of, but also to experience the beauty of. And even more than that, like things that come from the world. I immediately, of course, think of food. Don't those look so good? I saw that picture on the internet and I was like, I don't know. Or the other one I picked, if you're gluten-free, I'm sorry. You don't get to enjoy the world. I'm kidding. Coming after the gluten-free people. But we were created to enjoy the world. Like, we were created to eat cookies, essentially. That we were created to seek the goodness out of the world. That this world wasn't something that we like spend our life keeping away from all that is good, but that God said the world is good and it is yours to experience goodness. The second thing is this, that we are created to build and to create. To build and to create. You see, God, we see him create the world, and then he says, be like me in the world. I'm going to fast forward, but one of the beautiful things about the Bible is that it opens in a garden and it ends in a city. And what we are supposed to kind of get from that is that in a perfect world, in an ideal world, we would take the raw materials in the garden and we would honor those, but also that we would build and create more and more good things, so much so that there is a beautiful city at the end of it. That you and I were designed, we were fashioned, we were purposed, we were created with the intention that we would also create. And that could be all sorts of things, from like skyscrapers to rocket ships. I mean, if you can figure out how to create a rocket ship, I'm gonna say I don't want to go to space, so I don't know what I would do with that, but good for you. But also like less complicated things like tables and art, like that we were called to create more goodness for the world, that God has actually created the capacity inside each and every one of us to create more goodness in the world. If you play an instrument, I think like music is creating goodness in the world. If you play a sport, like when you engage in that, you are creating something that didn't exist, goodness in the world. And as long as the things that we pursue and we create are good and kind for us and for others, then we are living out our purpose that God has intended us. Sometimes I think we give the impression that like what God really hopes for us is that we'd all stay in this room and we just read the Bible and sing songs. And those things matter and they're important, which is why we actually do those things. Some of us were called to create more haze because there wasn't enough in here already. But that we were, yes, called to do those things, but we were also called to be out and among the world, adding to it, making it richer and better. And lastly, I think we are created to bring order to the world, to make sense of it. Like I said, God creates order out of chaos. And I think we're supposed to look around the world and say, where are things disordered? Where are things chaotic? And where can I bring order to the world? I think like math is weirdly an example of this. Like math helps bring understanding and order to the world. Okay, you turn on me now. Hey, I don't mean that you all have to be mathematicians. Everyone just relax. I think that brings order to the world. I think some of you are like literally really good at organizing things, and I think that brings order to the world. I think some of us, like growing plants, that brings order to the world. I know a lot of you really care about justice. Hey, stick with me for one more second. Like when we do work to make sure that people all get to live the way that every human being ought to live, like that is bringing order to a chaotic world. When you like make sure in your friendships and your relationships that everyone is doing well, that there's harmony and peace, that is bringing order to a chaotic world. Like this is what we're called to do. And sometimes I think we make our purpose like so specific or so challenging. But if we maybe can just go back to the beginning and to say, since the very moment of creation, if we look at the character of God and we say, well, God is good, and he is creative, and he is just, he's in integrity, he creates order. Like if we look at that nature of God, we go, oh, that's the kind of God that we serve. That's the kind of world that he created for us to live in. And then he creates us and he says, I want you to be like me. So we can see even from the beginning, God is going, wait, this is why you're here. This is what's going on. This is who you're called to be. Does that answer all of your questions about exactly how that looks? No, but I think it provides direction. I think it sets us free. To go, hey, this is way less complicated than we try to make it. That life is simply about knowing God and then knowing how to live the way that God calls us to live in the world. And we see from the very beginning that it's not about rules. It's not about doing all of the right things all of the time. It's actually about enjoying the beauty of the world and adding to it. That's who you're called to be. That's your purpose. And we see that from the very beginning. And obviously there are things that come in and complicate that. And we'll talk about that in the next weeks. But that's what I want you to hang on to. And that's what I want you to think about when you think about the beginning of the Bible. Not some attempt to explain the physics of how the world was created, but an attempt to explain the purpose of what this world is for and who you are. So with that, let's pray. Lord, we thank you that you created this world for us. And that even though it is clearly imperfect,